Christian parenting. So, you're having a baby.
I'm Craig Dennison.
And I'm Rachel Dennison. And today on So You're Having a Baby, we're chatting with Morgan Myers, a licensed professional counselor and co-founder of Motherlift, a platform aiming to provide educational resources and support for all things related to motherhood.
Morgan graduated with a master's in clinical mental health, all while working and having two beautiful daughters. She's been married for 10 years to a priest in the Anglican Church. She has experience with young kids in play therapy, counseling for teen depression and teen anxiety, young adult depression and anxiety, and postpartum depression for young moms. We know that you'll be encouraged by our conversation today around mental health and self-care with a new baby. So let's jump right in.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for being on with us today. This is so fun for me getting to do this with a friend. Morgan, I know I tell you this all the time, but I admire you so much. Not to put pressure on you, but you really do embody to me a wise, thoughtful, patient, and peaceful mom.
Thank you.
And I always get that vibe when I'm around you. I know vibe sounds very new age, but you just have this like presence about you of peace that's just so refreshing, and you really are a role model for me. So everyone listening, I can't wait for you to hear Morgan's heart and wisdom around these issues of self-care with a new baby, but also in general in parenting. It certainly doesn't stop after the newborn stage, so implementing these values and rhythms from the beginning can be so helpful. So to start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Morgan, your family, and what you do with Motherlift and your therapy practice?
Yeah, thank you so much. That is amazing to hear that about myself.
It's true.
So I am a mom of two girls and married for over 10 years to my husband, Chris. And we grew up in West Texas in Amarillo and moved here for seminary about 10 years. The same weekend we got married. So it's a crazy, big change at that time. And he is extreme introvert and I'm kind of in the middle, but my girls are extreme extroverts. So they are crazy and like spunky and introducing themselves to strangers all the time.
So they're so sweet.
They're really sweet and friendly, but yeah, we're always having to rein them in. And during COVID, my youngest, she's cut her own hair 3 times. It's getting shorter and shorter every week. So
amazing.
That's always something new and unexpected at our house. But I decided when we moved here, I was kind of like rethinking my life and my path in life, and realized I probably didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, just because I knew I needed kind of to get out of the house and have something beyond my family. And so I decided to go back to school and do counseling, because I think emotional health is really important, especially as believers, to believe that there's a layer of the way that we're wired that may not be something we can, pray against on its own. Like we have to kind of view our mental health as a health concern too, and not just a spiritual concern. Although I think there's a layer of that. But anyway, I could go down that path.
So good.
So yeah, I'm really passionate about working with people and validating their emotional experience. As I kind of formed Motherlift, which is an educational platform for moms anywhere on their mom journey, from pregnancy all the way through parenting. I formed it with my sisters, who we all 3 struggled with postpartum anxiety. My sister struggled with postpartum OCD, and I struggled with postpartum depression, and as well as pregnancy complications and all kinds of stuff. And we were just kind of chatting about it and kind of grieving that we all felt under-resourced, kind of like unsupported, not because people didn't want to support us, but just because we didn't understand what was going on and we didn't know how to ask for what we needed. And so we decided to start Motherlift to try to educate moms and support them and kind of untaboo a lot of those topics that are really actually really common, but we don't talk about it enough. So we're really excited about that and hope that we can help more women. I know I can help women in my private practice, but it has to be someone who could pay for therapy and someone who's lives near me and all that. So I'm excited to reach people beyond my geographic area.
That's so cool. That's amazing. Well, maybe to dive into the conversation a little bit, I'd love maybe Morgan, if you could describe for us the paradigm shift that happens emotionally, mentally, physically in a parent when the new baby enters the scene. We talk about it in our workbook as this idea of it feels like your world gets kind of a new center of gravity where it's like all of a sudden you had this life and there's a lot of things happening and then this little baby shows up and in your home it feels like all the attention and everything kind of orbits around this baby and its needs and wants, and you can have an infinite amount of adults in an area, but when the baby starts needing or wanting something, it's like all heads turn that direction and everyone's trying to figure out how to meet that need. And so it just is this massive shift that we experienced, I know a lot of parents experience, and it's kind of hard to prepare for what that's like when you've lived your whole life without that kind of center of gravity
Mm-hmm.
to orbit around. And how is that right? And how do we do that or correct that even as adults? And so maybe if you want to describe in your own words, like how do you see that shift that happens when a baby comes, and why does that make it so hard to take care of yourself?
Yeah, I think especially with your first baby, which I kind of think that's what we're talking about. It's the first time that there's like no space for your own needs, or the default is not your needs as parents. The default is the baby's needs. And even as you're pregnant, it's like, how's the baby? How's your pregnancy? It's not, how are you? Like, it's kind of baby
Right.
centered. And I know, I mean, there's been many times I'm like, hey, what about me? Like, I'm here too.
It's
Um,
true.
and of course, we want to care for our babies, and they do take up a lot of space in our lives, and rightly so. But I think that if we aren't in the habit of asking for what we need before the baby comes, with our partners, with the people around us, then we're going to kind of be blindsided by all the physical, emotional, mental kind of drain of a newborn. And I mean, I know men, I'm used to talking to women, so I'm going to try to include men too. But
Yeah.
like our sleep is disrupted, diet, all of it. Even taking a break to go to the bathroom feels like a challenge whenever
Yeah.
you have a
Yeah.
newborn. And so it's really important to make sure that you maintain your sense of your needs and not just totally kind of eclipse that with the baby's needs, which is really easy to do.
I felt like sometimes it felt easier to just like ignore my needs
Yeah.
than to try and deal with both,
Yeah.
when it like you're saying, going to the bathroom, getting a shower, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I joked about this on like our first episode, but you would be amazed how many days you can go without a shower.
Oh yeah,
In
for
that
sure.
newborn stage to where I was like, hey, I think something's growing in my hair. I think it's
Yes.
time.
Yeah, or like, man, I've been angry for 6 hours. What is this about? Oh, I haven't eaten anything since 5 a.m.
Literally.
Like,
Literally, I
yeah,
remember it was like every day I would not eat anything all day
yeah,
long until like 1 p.m.
yeah. Oh yeah,
And
for
I'm like,
sure.
that is a problem.
Easy. I think that's the way moms talk about it too. It's like, oh, like that's what it's like. But it doesn't have to be. And I think there's this kind of false dichotomy that like taking a break to get lunch is going to cause your child harm, or suffering. And it's just not true. Even
Yeah.
emotionally, like taking a break and walking outside for 15 minutes is not going to cause your baby harm as long as they're safe, in space inside. But we have to be able to have the wherewithal to pause and ask ourselves, what do we need? And I don't think
Yeah.
that we're in that habit, and we have to be intentional with that.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that a little bit. Like
Yeah.
in our workbook, we have like a whole week on this idea of balancing suffering and self care in those early days and how we have to hold the two in tension. And like
Yeah.
you're saying, obviously the baby needs everything from us and it can't do anything for itself. So there's this very real reality that the baby like needs something, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also this very real reality that you need lots of things still. You didn't like suddenly have no needs the minute
Mm-hmm.
you popped a baby out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I had to come to this realization that self care is baby care, and like you
Mm-hmm.
can't separate the two. And especially if you're struggling really deeply, no matter what it might be, your baby is going to only be as well as you are.
Mm-hmm.
So, Morgan, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the value of maintaining a healthy sense for and rhythms for self-care with a new baby, like maybe even some ways that people could do that more practically. Like in the workbook, we even tell people, like, I know this sounds crazy, but I need you right now to determine how many showers you want to
Mm-hmm.
get. Like, how frequently do you want to take showers? And hold yourself to these rhythms that seem very elementary, but in reality are hugely important and will go to the wayside very quickly and very easily.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something with being kind of setting it up from the beginning, like to think through each of those practical areas and talk it through. I mean, a big part of this is your partner communication and
Mm-hmm.
talking to your husband or your wife about what you need during that stage is really important. And I feel like that's where, the pressure is applied whenever we have newborns. It's applied to our marriage, and we have to be able to communicate. Like, that's essential because that's your
Mm-hmm.
closest. I mean, we'll talk about mental health stuff later, but that's one of the big indicators for postpartum mental health problems is if there isn't that partner support. So you have to
Mm.
set that up from the beginning. But when you think about our basic needs as humans, you have to start with the basics. So, yes, shower, like potty breaks, and like eating. And I know sleeping is not as easy as the others to do, but trying to take care of those basic needs first before you try to move on to like more of the emotional, social, mental needs too. I mean, those are important and those will come, but kind of like getting a game plan for those basic needs is really important. But yeah, I think like thinking about those big categories and talking it through with your partner or even family members that may be coming over to help. Like, that's why I love like the meal trains, because it really is like the
Mm.
best thing you need. Like, you need someone to be thinking about your basic needs in those first few weeks, because you're just kind of like in like la la land for a while
Yeah,
as you're
survival
adjusting.
mode.
Yeah.
That's so good. That makes me, what you're saying, Morgan, makes me think about like something that is maybe at odds with this idea is, at least here in America, we have this value for self-sufficiency, I think.
Yeah.
And before kids, it feels like, maybe I don't think that's really possible to be fully self-sufficient. I think the gospel is at odds with that idea, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's this kind of sense that you can take care of yourself
Mm-hmm.
fully. You don't really need anyone.
Right.
But when the baby hits, that kind of goes out the window pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And realizing that, oh, there's a lot of things I really can't do for myself. So I know for us in our marriage, it was actually a really big boost across the last years of having kids in our communication,
Mm-hmm.
because we realized there's just we kind of knew each other's worlds and could kind of meet needs for each other a little bit more without having to be as conversational about that before kids, because
Mm-hmm.
life just wasn't as busy. And so I
Yeah.
had more space to be able to kind of get visibility on how Rachel's doing or her with
Mm-hmm.
how I'm doing. But with kids, that kind of attention goes there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to care for yourself. And so really, like you're saying, the verbalizing what you need to your spouse or to other people in your life is kind of that was a transition for us, really the first time in our whole life, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting to think about, that idea of like self-sufficiency versus the need to kind of lay that down when you have kids and see and realize like I cannot be self-sufficient for my
Yeah.
sake or the sake of my family. Like
Yeah.
we actually need to shift into this more corporate communal
Mm-hmm.
mindset and taking advantage of the people that God has supplied around us to be able to thrive even in this really tough season.
Yeah.
Yeah, help is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to like reorient that in our heads, especially if it's people that maybe you don't love spending too much time with. I don't know, for example, family. Say you have family members that you don't really mesh with too well, but they may be like directly related to this new baby, possibly,
Mm-hmm.
and they might want to see this baby a lot. And so finding ways to be like, you know what, I need help right now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to create boundaries around the way I do that and
Mm-hmm.
around how often you're here or whatever. But even with the meal train, y'all, there were days that I was like bedridden. I know I don't mean to scare people, but I did not do well after Wes was born, physically recovering. And there were days that we just had to tell people, hi, you can just leave the meal at the door. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Like Rachel can't see you. The baby can't see you right now, like that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't always have to be people in your business like 24/7. There's always ways that you can create boundaries around it. But
Yeah.
We have to reframe that, like asking for help and receiving help are really good things, especially in this stage.
Morgan, as you were kind of wrestling with that, was there anything that you tried or that you and Chris did in terms of communication? I know one of the things we promote, which is what I hear you saying too, is this idea of kind of for your family, figure out the things that matter to you. So obviously
Mhm.
with Rachel mentioning showers, that's something that's really refreshing for her and is something that we've talked about and tried to work a system out for. But everyone can kind of have their things that they need to really fight for in order
Yeah.
to care for themselves. And that might be different
Yeah.
couple to couple. But for you and Chris, like, does anything come to mind for you in terms of how you guys did that for each other?
Yeah. I think because a big part for me, a big part of my story was the mental health part and feeling I kind of descended into depression with both of my babies. It was super important for me to get out and do the things that I kind of made me feel like my old self, like estate sales shopping or like kind of
Mm,
silly stuff like that. But getting out and reminding myself like I have an identity. I'm not floating in,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
space with these babies that are just gonna kind of demand a lot from me and felt draining, so I had to kind of advocate for that need. And we had both agreed like to provide space for each other for things like that. So then I would give him some time to, he always wants kind of some time to go in his cave and be alone. So we kind of agreed, like for a while there, probably for 2 or 3 years, every Saturday we just switched off. Like he would get 3 hours and then I'd get 3 hours alone to do whatever we wanted. But yeah, it's that like I'll serve you, you serve me, and like we're a team kind of thing. It's really important, and it keeps you afloat. I mean, it doesn't take much to feel like, okay, like I'm ready to go back home. I'm ready to face this day and like take care of this baby and love my family and all that.
Yeah, so like practically speaking, when it comes to finding ways to implement self-care into you or your husband's lives, what I hear you saying is like find what is meaningful for you. Like I have friends who love to like go bike riding and like, well, you probably won't be able to do that after giving birth, but
Yeah.
but like going on walks, or they just like love nature. They're nature people. That is not me, but hey, you do you. If that is what like refreshes you, then go for it and make space for it and raise your hand and say, hey, like for example, my friend's husband loves to bike. Let's go with the male biking. So he will say, hey, I really need to get out and go on like a 30-minute bike ride. And so making space for the things that either of you value practically, whether that's going on a walk, exercising, helping each other get some alone time, that's like Craig's big thing. And so like I will watch the kids so that he can go out into our back office and just like read and meditate and use his putting thing for golf and just, that's like what he values. Or spending time with God. Like one of the big things that I loved that we did, and we actually still really do because we're kind of in the rhythm of it. We set that rhythm early on and now we're just in it, is my wonderful, precious husband will make me coffee in the morning.
It's
But
the
it's
little
like such,
things.
it's the little things that
Mhm.
it's like, I just know it's coming and it's for me. And even now with a 4-year-old and a 21-month-old, they come at you first thing in the morning. They want a million things. And Wesley knows this now. I just say, I will do that for you when I finish my coffee. I will get you that when I finish my coffee. And this is something for me. And it's just so important to me. I can't explain it. If I don't get my morning coffee where I can just sit and enjoy it, I'm like a witch for the rest of the day
Yeah.
until I get it for real.
Yeah.
So just to encourage the people listening, take some, self-assessment, some inventory of yourself. What do I value? What do I really love right now doing? And how can I maybe implement that some and fight for that for my spouse in those days? Because I remember days where, just like you were saying, Morgan, I felt like I was drowning in this like baby sea and like had to literally just go sit on the porch and drink coffee in the sunshine. And it did like so much for me. And we can't underestimate like the power of that, even if it's like 10 minutes, just to reset your day, reset your mood, reset your emotions.
yeah, I think too that there's something about that we're talking about right now that I think is actually really valuable for the kids and not just for us, and not just even related to obviously like our health, like Rachel said, is connected to the health of our kids, and how we're thriving really creates a way for them to thrive. But I remember kind of at odds with this sense that I got when we first had Wes of kind of getting a new sense of gravity is a mentor of mine saying that the two best things that you can teach your kids is first, that they're loved unconditionally, and second, that they're not the center of the universe. And those two things feel, I think, often to me, but I know especially for our kids, like they don't go together. Like, how can you love me unconditionally, but tell me that, you can't meet my needs right now or my wants, or, that the family has to do this. I know that's different than what you want to do. And I think there's something powerful to even doing that, even with a newborn, kind of starting your family system to say, I will always love you unconditionally, but you're not the center of the universe. Sometimes mommy or daddy need things, or sometimes our friend needs things, or we as a family are going to do something that you don't want to do. And kind of beginning your family dynamic that way is a great gift to give your kids, because I think if your kids go through their life being raised up thinking they are the center of the universe, then they're going to get a rude awakening when they step out of your house. And I think it's better to kind of raise your kids in that environment in a way that fosters unconditional love and knowing that they're valued, but also creates that system for realizing that the world isn't all about them, that they're not necessarily the center of the universe they're living in.
Yeah.
To me, even practically what that looks like is like, because I even wonder, like, for if you'd never had a baby, you'd probably be like, what does that even mean? But like, remember when we were talking with Amy Odom on the breastfeeding podcast, she talked about giving the baby a passy so you can get a shower. Like, that's
Right.
what that looks like with a newborn, like being like, I know that you're hungry or whatever, you just want to like self-soothe. I have to take a shower, period. Like, it cannot be stretched out any further. Here is a passy, and I can see you you're in the bathroom with me. I can see you while I'm showering. You are fine. And I think that even that teaches your baby something.
Yeah, that's great. I tell my clients a lot and tell myself a lot that we kind of owe it to our kids to take care of ourselves, because we do not want to model kind of like self-denial and burnout. Like, we don't want them to watch us all their whole lives come in like an empty shell, like barely hanging on. We want them to see us living full lives and taking breaks. And even as little ones, they need to see mommy leaves and mommy comes back. Mommy has fun, and mommy has fun outside the house. Mommy has fun inside the house. Like, they need to see that. That creates kind of a sense of security for them, that it's not just me, I'm the center of the universe, like you're saying. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
I know that's a weight that I felt when I found out. I think I was hopeful both were going to be girls, partly because I didn't know this at the time, but subconsciously I was hoping that they wouldn't look to me as, the as a model of sorts for them. That's just like a pressure. And so finding out we had boys with both, I was like, oh shoot. Like, the way that I live my life is going to be the picture they get most frequently of what it means to be a man living in this world, and what it means to be a dad, if they have families of their own someday, and all of that stuff, and work and family dynamics and balance of life and health and all that stuff. And that's true for regardless of the gender of your kids, for both parents. But I think there's a special lean into, whatever gender that you are in that conversation with what gender your kids are. And so I remember that weight of that pressure, but also the opportunity inside of that. I really started getting a lot of my stuff together when I found out we were having a boy. Like, Rachel prepped for having Wes with nesting and thinking about home stuff. I started running and exercising because I didn't want him to I wanted to have energy for a boy. And I started thinking through all these different dynamics and, what do I want him to inherit? Started going to counseling and therapy and dealing with my stuff,
That's
and all of
really
that.
good.
So
Yeah, you're prepping to be his model, which is, it's just great. That's what he needs.
Yeah. And I think that that's what you're talking about, Morgan, is really meaningful there in terms of getting to model things that we want for them, even when they're adults, even if that's not necessarily that they're excited about today. Like, Wes doesn't love that I go into my office to work ever.
No.
Like, when he's in the home, he's like, and he knows what I love to do with him. And so now he uses that. He's like, Daddy, let's snuggle. Like, Daddy, let's play catch. Daddy, let's kick the soccer ball. Daddy, let's do all these different things. And and it's so hard every time to say, I have to go to work. But, and there's a balance there for sure, where if there's times I can do that, I do it. But at the same time, teaching him the value of work, even though he doesn't love that right now, I think is helpful too. All right, so quick plug for something that Rachel and I are super excited about. Parents often feel the pressure to parent well, but life, especially right now, makes parenting well so hard.
This is why we are so excited to announce that we will be speaking at the online Perfectly Imperfect Christian Parenting event on October 23rd and 24th.
This completely digital event was designed for parents like us at a time to set aside perfection and receive the practical and spiritual help that we need in an easy and accessible digital format. And we're so excited to be able to be participating inside of this event.
The goal is to help you check perfection at the door or couch and become the perfectly imperfect parent God has called you to be.
So we're going to be doing a longer form talk around what this podcast is, and this idea of thriving with a newborn. Really excited for us to be able to kind of visually and in a lot of different ways share our story here and to be able to prepare you and equip you for what it looks like to engage in this season with a newborn really well. And in addition to our talk, there's going to be over 40 other short consumable talks giving you both practical and spiritual advice for some incredible speakers. Speakers like Aaron and Jamie Ivey, Mark Batterson, Jonathan Pitts, Nicole Zazowski, the Duck Dynasty crew, and many more.
Register today for this digital Christian parenting event at baby.perfectlyimperfect.org. You'll also find the link to the event in our show notes. We look forward to seeing you there.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about something that I think is unique in this conversation as it relates to especially having a new baby. But let's talk about like the spiritual life aspect of self-care, and it's something that I feel like before having a baby, the rhythms that we cling to for our spiritual health and connection are a little bit easier to access. Things like going to church is a little bit easier when you're not lugging kids, let alone a baby around, or you're sleepless yourself and it feels really nice to, get to sleep in if your churches meet on Sunday mornings. Things like getting time to read or worship or pray, like some of the spiritual disciplines are hard to get at any time with the world we live in and how busy it is, but especially tough when you have a newborn and kids. Throughout our lives have really clinged to like spiritual conversations coming up at dinner with friends or something as a reminder of the goodness of God. And that can be tougher. To even get time with friends can be tougher, let alone have, some of the deeper conversations you might be used to with a baby next to you, or whatever that is. So maybe Morgan, if you have any thoughts on, knowing that it needs to look probably different, expectations need to probably be different, but what it looks like to engage in some form of spiritual health with a newborn.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this kind of goes to the idea of that Christ is with us all the time, whether we're actively pursuing him and reading and praying and worshiping, or whether we're being still or we're in our vocation or we're caring for our kids, that it's kind of the hands and feet of Christ, So I have this picture of like that verse, like a hen gathers in its chicks, and we're kind of, as new parents, that's what we're doing. We're gathering in our chicks and we're bringing them under our wings. But God is doing that with us in that season too. And we get to kind of rest in the shadow of his wings. And it can be more passive, I think, in that season of just kind of resting and letting his presence be with us. But it is tough. And I feel like if I was sitting in front of a client worried about that, I would say, like, don't let this be another thing on your list that you have to do when you're exhausted. Just kind of rest in your identity in Christ and kind of taking the long view. If this is a relationship, then it's going to be here in every season of life, and it's going to grow and change as you grow and change. And I feel like those were really sweet moments when I'm nursing in the middle of the night and the house is quiet, and you feel peace, or you look into your baby's eyes and you feel joy. Like those are all like moments where I experienced God as a new mom. And I think we all get to do that if we just kind of keep our eyes open.
That's so good. Rachel, does any memories, I love those memories that you shared, Morgan, the sentiment of the availability of God. I've been reading this book I'm reading this book right now that's talking about kind of opening or expanding our notion of what it means to access God and be in a
Yeah.
relationship with Him, and
Mm.
it incorporating even hardship into that. I think we like to almost try to systematize out, trials or tribulations or things that
Yeah.
are tough out of our faith and try to create a faith system or life system that prohibits us from experiencing things that are tough
Uh-huh.
as much as possible. But that's at odds with the story of Scripture,
Mm-hmm.
definitely at odds with the life of Jesus and the
Yeah.
fact that God actually often takes our trials, or even, outside of life of Jesus, even our failures, and uses them as maybe the most meaningful part of what transformation looks like in Him and life with Him. And but the other piece of that is this idea of kind of the deep, not to get too heady, but the deep timelessness of God,
Mm-hmm.
and that underneath the current, we are eternal beings, even though we
Mm-hmm.
have this life here on earth, and God dwells in all of eternity. And there is this sense of availability of kind of getting some more context to the moment we're living in, to say that, this moment is really tough, or I don't have the things I wish I was doing. And I wish I had an hour for this or 15 minutes for this time with God, or could go to church consistently. But there's a timelessness to this relationship with God that He lives in. And I
Mm-hmm.
think invites us into as well, even as we have this really prominent sense of time, usually
Mm-hmm.
right now as a society and as people. So
Right.
love that invitation you're talking about of just being with God and knowing He
Mm-hmm.
is with you.
Mm-hmm.
And even a moment to Him is something that's incredibly exciting and can be energizing and fulfilling. But
Yeah.
Rachel, I feel like you had some sweet memories too around what it looked like to have some experiences with God with a newborn,
Yeah.
knowing that things were really tough.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, went through a ton of suffering, I feel like, after having Wes, but more than anything, I think I went into it with this preconceived notion that God was pleased with me because of how I sought Him, and
Mm.
because I would daily spend time with Him or read or worship or whatever it was. And nothing will knock that idol down faster than having a newborn and being completely unable to do the things that you did. And so I just want to encourage anyone listening that, like, yes, comparison is a thief, and you can't even compare yourself to yourself in the past. And that was a big thing for me, was feeling like, oh, I was closer to God in college or before having kids or all these things. But God has really stripped me of that falsehood of that it would require me to do anything for Him to love me. And He's just really been restoring that. And nothing will teach you that like having a newborn baby yourself, and you being a parent and being so wrapped up and in love with this child that can literally do nothing for you. And seeing like the grace, like nothing will teach you that like having a baby, and the grace that you experience for your baby and love that you experience for your baby, realizing it's just a mirror of the way the Father feels about you. And so I just really felt like God reoriented the way that I understood my relationship with Him in those early days, and really just showed me like, Rachel, this is enough. Like, this is enough for me, for you to just even turn your eyes and your heart toward me.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, Morgan, like in the night when you're nursing,
Mm-hmm.
just taking a moment. And even like last night, for the first time in forever, Wells woke up crying and I went into his room and rocked him to sleep. I have not done that since Wells was probably a baby, like 6 months. And it was just the sweetest moment because I felt so much peace. I felt the presence of God so strongly last night as I was in his room, just rocking him, because there's like nowhere else for me to be. There's no distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And all I am doing is like pouring out love on this baby. And I just like felt the joy of God over me and the presence of God in this moment of like total peace and like total dependence. And it was just the sweetest moment. And so, like, all that to say, don't go into it with expectations of yourself of like all these like things like that you think you should be doing, when in reality I think God is going, hey, the pressure is off. Turn your heart toward me. Remember that I'm here. Reach for me when you're in pain. Reach for me when you're frustrated and angry and disappointed. Reach for me, in the joyous moments, like, because I'm always here. And I think it's just a good reminder that He's just with us, like Morgan was saying.
Yeah, that's good. And relationships are meant to grow and change. Like,
Yeah, I loved that. I
yeah,
love that you said that.
yeah.
Only a therapist, I swear. The things that come out of Morgan's mouth, I'm always just like, golly. I mean, I just feel like you're just very observant of life in general.
Oh,
And so you pick up on all these little, just like nuggets of wisdom
oh.
throughout all your relationships. Well, to pivot, because you're like an expert on this topic, not only have you experienced it yourself, but you've helped so many women walk through this season. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about the important topic of postpartum depression and baby blues. So I would love if you could tell us a little bit about both and why they occur, and maybe how new parents can be on the lookout for signs of either of those things.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of confusion about these. Even I had confusion, and I was in school studying this at the time,
Mm.
like with a newborn at home. So baby blues is really like kind of very short term. It's like the first week or two after you have a baby, and it's more about kind of all the hormone changes and the letdown of the experience you just went through. I'm sure like the pain of delivery is probably playing a part, like all the change that's just happened and all of that. So it's more situational. And that would be like, feelings of sadness, like really teary, emotional. I feel like basically everyone experiences the teary
Yeah.
emotional part. It's kind of a heaviness. But if it goes beyond like week 3, then you're kind of getting into potentially the depression kind of symptoms. So then it's similar symptoms, feeling teary, sad, but it gets a little more intense. So it can be feelings of hopelessness, despair, wanting to withdraw from everything and everyone, and then kind of the typical depression symptoms. But what's challenging about postpartum depression is it's hard to identify the symptoms because normally you'd look at sleep disruption, which happens already with a newborn, eating disruptions, like wanting to eat, like not wanting to eat or wanting to eat way too much, but then that's kind of messed up with a newborn too. So it's hard to go by those symptoms, but definitely if there's any intrusive thoughts or wanting to hurt yourself, those more serious thoughts, then those are like big red flags that you may be going down that path. Really, the main one that I kind of watch out for is just losing all interest in everything. It's like you see in grayscale and you can't,
Mm.
Mm.
even the joys are just kind of dull. And I would encourage everyone to get help as soon as possible. There's all kinds of research about the earlier the intervention, the shorter that the life of that mental health concern is. So the longer you let it go, the harder it is to kind of dig yourself out of it. So yeah, it's kind of those are really tough, especially when you have a baby at home to like have the wherewithal to stop and say, oh wait, something's off. So that's a good one to talk to. Make sure you're talking to your spouse about and your family about so they can watch for those
Mm.
signs too.
What would you say to maybe someone who would feel shameful about even speaking up? Even I know there's just wrong stigmas around mental health and depression and anxiety and all of those things. And so, like, what encouragement would you have for the mom who is experiencing these symptoms but doesn't want to tell anybody?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first I'll say it's 1 in 7 that experiences this, so it's fairly common,
Mm.
and I think it's really important for women to know that they are not alone. There are so many women who struggle, and there's no reason to struggle, like go on struggling when there's so many solutions and so much hope. So yeah, I would say find a therapist that you feel like is speaking to you, and find a community. There's Facebook groups, like my Mother Lift platform. There are people out there who are speaking to that concern, and you can kind of read about it before maybe you take the risk and book an appointment. But if I would encourage you to maybe speak to a therapist, because they're going to be speaking to you about the emotional side rather than just jumping straight into medication. It's hard though. I mean, I kept feeling like, get yourself together. That's what I kept telling myself when I was experiencing this. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, you have a beautiful baby. Like, I didn't have a hard baby, thank God. I mean,
Yeah.
they slept pretty fairly well. They ate well. And I was like, what are you complaining about? There was a lot of shame that I had on myself. And finally, it was like I hit that wall and I reached out for help. And it was like that idea in the Bible, like you don't like he doesn't. I'm gonna butcher this, but like he doesn't leave you hanging. I mean, you reach out for help and he's swift to come and help, and that's what it felt like. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm desperate here. And then immediately, like I had a therapist step in and be like, it's okay. Like and, kind of like that comforting presence. So,
So huge. I know that one of the hardest things I've run into as a mom was how hard it would be to ask for help, especially if it meant I would be inconveniencing Craig or inconveniencing my mom or anybody else. And I felt like I should be able to handle it. Like you're saying, whatever the issue may be, stress, sleeplessness, overwhelm. And I held this belief that I needed to like grin and bear it and just handle it.
yeah.
And it led me into this toxic cycle ultimately of ending up in like mommy burnout, where, I mean, man, it was like last year. Yeah, it was like last year. Craig was traveling a lot. I just had Wells. I would say Wells was around like 3 months, and he went through horrible sleep regression, and I wasn't sleeping like at all. And I was just literally like hitting rock bottom because I just would not speak up and I would not ask for help. I wouldn't wave my white flag.
Yeah.
So just to encourage moms listening, like we cannot harp on this enough to become comfortable with asking for help, even if it does inconvenience someone, even if it does mean you're passing some responsibility to somebody else, like finding ways for you to have an out. Like that's when we hired our nanny, and she has literally been like a lifesaver for us in so many ways. And maybe that's not the solution for you, but like just staying open to Mother's Day out, like starting a program like that to start helping you get some help so that you can just get some free time for yourself again. It's like the most refreshing, life-giving thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And your kids need to see you ask for help too. You're modeling that, like that you don't just grin and bear it and push yourself past your limits to where you're a basket case, like they need to see you taking care of yourself. Like that's so important.
So good. Morgan, thanks for sharing today your experience as well as your wisdom.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate that. I think it's an incredibly valuable and critical part of this conversation around what it looks like to not just get by, but even try to thrive in the
Yeah.
season with a newborn. I think this is such a critical part of that. That's why we include it in our workbook, and you're the perfect person to talk to about this. So as we wrap up the conversation, is there maybe just one thing, even outside of this topic, whatever comes to mind for you, one thing you would say to a mom and dad that are right now preparing for a new baby?
I think it's important to pay attention to the shoulds. I mean, I heard we all kind of like self-disclose the shoulds that we have in our own lives. Like, and anytime you hear yourself saying, I should have known better, or I should be able to handle this, that's kind of like a shame path that you're going down in your head. And that never really motivated anybody to do anything. So if you can go back to, what do I think is best? What do I need? What are my baby's needs? That's going to be a better, like more productive path to take. I think that's a big one that parents, there's so many shoulds in this phase of life, and we have to be able to trust our own intuition as parents, and we have to be able to know our needs and know our kids' needs.
Thank you so much for listening. We really hope today's conversation was deeply encouraging for each of you. If you want to follow along with Morgan and everything she's doing, get her mental health tips, and be encouraged on your parenting journey, check her out on Instagram at the handle @Motherlift. They are always posting incredible, insightful content, and I am personally encouraged by them all the time.
And if you're looking for more resources to help you get prepared practically and spiritually for the season of having a newborn, Rachel and I wrote a workbook that we're incredibly proud of called A Parent's Guide to New Baby to help you have an immersive experience every day yourself or with your spouse to get prepared practically and spiritually for this really tough season. You can go to christianparenting.org to find that book, A Parent's Guide to New Baby. We know that parenting a newborn is real hard, but we're here to help.